Okay, let's start. Number 1. The Ancient Egyptians and the War of Horus and Set. You're standing inside the enclosure wall at the Temple of Horus at Edfu in Upper Egypt. The temple is the best preserved building to survive from the ancient world, its pylons still standing 118 feet high, its roof still on, its inner chambers still dark at midday. Construction ran from 237 to 57 BCE, but the texts carved on the wall in front of you are far older, copied forward from earlier temples the way a state copies forward a legal statute. And what is carved on this wall is not a prayer. It is a campaign record. The Egyptians called it the Myth of Horus. H.W. Fairman spent decades reconstructing it and published the full reconstruction in 1974 under the title it earned, The Triumph of Horus. What he established is that these inscriptions are a script. There are speaking parts. There is a chorus. There are stage directions. There are cues telling the reader when to pause and when the priest should move. This is a war narrative written for annual public performance, and the performance was held. Here's what the wall actually records. The war between Horus and Set is given as a campaign with geography. It opens in Nubia in the 363rd year of the reign of Ra-Horakhda, a dated regnal year, and it moves north down the Nile through named engagements. At Edfu, at Thebes, at Dendera, into the Fayum, into the delta at Zaru, and finally out of Egypt entirely into Asia. Each stage names the location, the enemy formation, the outcome, and the disposition of prisoners. Read the sequence with the place names alone, and it reads like a general's after-action report. The enemy is not a metaphor either. Set commands a force the texts call the followers of Set, and they change form under pursuit, taking the shape of hippopotami and crocodiles in the water to break contact. Horus counters with a harpoon crew operating from boats. The reliefs number the strikes. 10 harpoons, each one carved, each one captioned with the exact body part it entered. The snout, the forehead, the neck, the ribs, the thigh. That is targeting data, cut into stone on a temple wall. Now look at what the Egyptian state did with it. The Horus name was the first of the 5 names in every pharaoh's titulary, and it was the oldest. It appears on the Serach of Kings before the pyramids were built. For 3,000 years, every man who took the throne of Egypt took it as a serving combatant in that war, not as a descendant of a god, as a participant in an ongoing conflict. And they kept fighting it on the calendar. The Festival of Victory at Edfu was an annual state event with the drama performed in the temple forecourt, a hippopotamus figure destroyed at the climax, and the harpoon ritual carried out in front of the public. The papyrus Chester Beatty I, copied around 1160 BCE, preserves a second and much older version, the Contendings of Horus and Set, in which the dispute runs 80 years and is heard by a tribunal that takes minutes, adjourns, reconvenes, and issues rulings. 80 years of litigation and combat between 2 gods, recorded like a court docket. There is a third liturgy. The Bremnerine Papyrus, now in the British Museum, contains a text called the Book of Overthrowing Apophis. It is not a story. It is an operations manual instructing priests in the daily procedure for the war against the serpent Apophis, who attacks the sunboat every night at the same point in its passage. It specifies the wax figure, the marking, the spitting, the trampling, the burning, and the hour. The Egyptian priesthood ran a scheduled daily engagement against a divine enemy, and they wrote the standard operating procedure down. Then Egypt turned on Set. From the 3rd Intermediate Period onward, his images were chiseled off monuments, his name hacked out of inscriptions, his figure recut into other gods. The Egyptian state carried out a systematic erasure campaign against one of its own deities. You do not deface a symbol for 1,000 years. You deface an enemy. So who was Egypt at war with for 3,000 years? Why does a temple wall give the war a regnal date, a route up the Nile, and a numbered harpoon count with impact locations? Why did every pharaoh take his first and oldest title from one side of it? And what was the priesthood defending against every single night, on a written schedule? The wall at Edfu is intact. It is the most legible surface left from the ancient world, and it has never been read as anything but decoration. From the Nile we go east, to a plain north of Delhi, where the war was fought in the air. Number 2. The Vedic kingdoms of Bharata versus the Asuras. You're on the plain of Kurakshetra, 90 miles north of modern Delhi, in 3138 BCE. The soil here is dark red, and it stays dark red. 18 armies are drawn up across a front you cannot see the end of, and the dust off the chariot lines has already closed the horizon on both sides. The count preserved in the record is 18 Akshahinis, roughly 1.6 million combatants, plus 393,000 chariots, and the same number of war elephants. The fighting will last 18 days. When it ends, the surviving population of the northern subcontinent will be measured in the low thousands, and a substantial portion of the force on that field is not human. The Asuras and the Rakshasas are not spirits in these texts, and they are not symbols. They are a rival people with their own territories, dynasties, capitals, and kings, and the Mahabharata gives their genealogies with the same precision it gives human houses. Bakasura holding a district and taking tribute in food and in men. Hidimba and his sister ruling a forest region. Garutkhacha, a half-Rakshasa commander whose battlefield capability is described as increasing after sundown. Ravana's line in the older Ramayana material, ruling a fortified island city with a standing air force. Named individuals, recorded lineages, recorded deaths. The physical descriptions hold steady across 1,000 years of separate manuscript traditions. Enormous size. Strength that does not scale with human muscle. The ability to change shape and to go invisible on the field. And effectiveness that rises at night, which is why the Kurukshetra rules of engagement, laid out before the war begins, prohibit combat after sunset. That rule is broken on the 14th day, with the result the text records. Here's what the record actually says about how they fought it. The Vimanas appear throughout, as flying machines with metal hulls, mercury-driven propulsion, disc-shaped bodies, and combat capability, including altitude, pursuit, and ground attack. The Vaimanika Shastra, brought to public attention in 1952 from material held at Ujjain, specifies pilot diet, protective clothing, hull metals, and 4 separate propulsion configurations. The Mahabharata describes an aerial engagement in which a machine circles a formation and releases a single projectile. That projectile is the Brahmastra. The text describes a single column of smoke and flame brighter than 10,000 suns, rising with the radiance of the sun at the center of a cloud. Elephants and horses in the surrounding area are thrown into the air by the pressure and burned where they land. Then it describes the aftermath, and the aftermath is why this passage outranks everything else in the ancient world. Survivors' hair and fingernails fall out over the following days. Food becomes inedible. Birds turn white. Soldiers throw themselves into rivers to wash off what has settled on their skin and their equipment. The dead cannot be identified. That is not religious poetry. That is the clinical progression of acute radiation syndrome, written down in Sanskrit, in the order the symptoms actually appear. Now go northwest, to the Indus. At the upper levels of Mohenjo-daro, excavations directed by Ernest Mackay in the 1920s and re-examined by later teams found layers of vitrified material, rock and brick, fused into glass. Vitrification requires sustained temperatures above 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. An open wood or charcoal fire tops out near 2,000. Nothing in the Bronze Age toolkit closes that gap. Nothing. In the same strata, skeletons were recovered lying in the streets and in doorways, some holding hands, unburied, not arranged, not interred. The city was not sacked and occupied. It stopped in place. West of Jodhpur in Rajasthan, there is a field of ash roughly 3 square miles across where the ground reads hot on instruments and the local prohibition on settlement is older than anyone can date. At Kurukshetra the soil keeps its color, and the regional tradition holds that nothing permanent built on the battlefield stands. The conventional position is that the Mahabharata is allegory, that the Asuras represent moral failings, and that the weapons are invention. The text runs to 1.8 million words. It contains land grants, tax structures, marriage contracts, treaty terms, troop counts by unit, and the succession order of 40 generations of kings. Every other category of information in it has been treated as historical source material by Indian historians for 2 centuries. Only the enemy and the weapons are set aside. So who were the Asuras, and why does the text give them capitals and coordinates? Why does a Bronze Age epic list hair loss, nail loss, and unquenchable thirst in the correct clinical sequence? What fused the brick at Mohenjo-daro at temperatures no ancient fire reaches? And why is the ash field west of Jodhpur still empty? The plain at Kurukshetra is farmland now. The dirt is still the wrong color. 2,000 miles northeast, another civilization wrote down what it fought. That one had a head made of bronze. Number 3. The Yellow River Chinese versus Chiyu and the lie. You're on the field of Zhualu in 2500 BCE, in what is now Hebei province, about 90 miles northwest of Beijing. You cannot see the man standing next to you. The fog came down at the start of the engagement, and it has not lifted for 3 days, and it is not weather. It arrived when the enemy commander wanted it, over the Allied lines only, and it has held position since. Somewhere ahead of you in that fog is Kaiyu, and the Chinese state has never once, in 4,000 years of continuous record-keeping, described him as a man. This is the founding battle of Chinese civilization. Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor, has united the Yan and Huang confederations for the first time, and every dynasty for the next 4 millennia will trace its legitimacy to this ground. Sima Qian opens the Shiji, the records of the Grand Historian, with it around 94 BCE, filing it as the first event in Chinese history, rather than the last event in Chinese myth. Here's what the histories actually describe. Kaiyu has a head of bronze and a forehead of iron. He has 4 eyes and 6 arms. He has horns on his head and hooves instead of feet, and the Shanhajing records that he eats sand, stones, and iron. He has 72 brothers in the earliest sources and 81 in the Han commentaries, and every one of them carries the identical anatomy. Not similar. Identical. Chinese historiography is the most conservative documentary tradition on earth. Court historians were executed for altering records. And this tradition, across independent texts separated by centuries and compiled in different capitals under different dynasties, reproduces the same anatomical description of a named commander and his brothers without variation, without softening, and without ever offering an alternative reading. Kaiyu's people brought metal. The sources are unanimous. The lie under Kaiyu introduced the 5 weapons of bronze to the continent, and they had them before anyone else did. The dagger axe, the halberd, the sword, the spear, and the short-handled blade. Chinese metallurgy begins with the enemy, not the founder, and every Chinese source says so in plain language. The fog was a deployed weapon. It covered the Allied army, it did not cover Qi Yu's, and it held for 3 days while the Yanwang forces lost formation and could not withdraw. Huangdi's answer is recorded as the south-pointing chariot, a wheeled frame carrying a figure that held a fixed heading regardless of which way the vehicle turned. That device is the first directional instrument in Chinese history, and it was built in the field, mid-battle, for one purpose: to get an army out of an artificial fog. The counter-weapon was the drum of the Kui, audible across 500 miles and struck 9 times, which broke the enemy formation. Kaiyu lost. He was killed, and here the record stops behaving like legend. He was buried. The mound is at Yanggu in Shandong province, and it is still there. Han astronomers recorded a red vapor rising from the site in the shape of a banner and catalogued it under the name Kaiyu's banner, entering it into official astronomical tables as an omen category, a state astronomical classification named after a defeated non-human commander, maintained for centuries. Then the emperors began sacrificing to him. Liu Bang made offerings to Kaiyu before founding the Han dynasty in 202 BCE. He was worshipped as the god of war by successive imperial administrations for more than 2,000 years, with a state altar and a budget line. Nobody in China deified a mythical monster and funded his upkeep out of the treasury. They made offerings to something they believed had been real, and dangerous enough to require appeasement long after its death. And the Miao people of southern China, with their own separate oral tradition, and no reason to preserve a rival's propaganda, claim descent from Qi Yu directly. They name him as an ancestor and a king, not a beast. Their account holds that their people were driven south after Zhuelu and have stayed there ever since. The standard explanation is that Kaiyu was a tribal chieftain, and the anatomy is metaphor for bronze helmets. Bronze helmets do not explain 4 eyes. They do not explain 6 arms, or hooves, or a diet of stone. And they do not explain why the metaphor is reproduced identically in texts that had no access to one another. So what did Huangdi's army meet at Zhuelu? Where did the Lai acquire bronze weapons before the continent had bronze? What produced 3 days of stationary fog over one army and not the other? And why did the emperors of China keep an altar to him burning for 2,000 years? The mound at Yanggu is intact. Nobody has opened it. Number 4. The Babylonians and the war against Tiamat. You're in Babylon on the 4th day of Nisan, in a closed chamber of the Esagila temple, and the high priest is reading aloud. He will read for hours. 7 tablets, roughly 1,000 lines, start to finish, without abridgment, in front of an audience of 1. This happens every year, on the same date, by law. What he is reading is a combat record. The tablets came out of the ground at Nineveh in 1849, pulled from the library of Ashurbanipal by Austin Henry Layard's expedition. George Smith translated them and presented the results to the Society of Biblical Archaeology in 1876, and what he laid out was not a hymn. The Enuma Elish is an order of battle. Here's what the tablets actually say. Tiamat raises an army, and the text inventories it. 11 classes of combatant, listed by type. The horned viper, the dragon, the hairy hero, the great lion, the mad dog, the scorpion man, the storm demon, the fish man, the bull man, and the rest, each one specified as bearing weapons, and in the text's own phrase, made not to retreat. She promotes her consort Kingu to supreme command and fastens the tablet of destinies to his chest, which the text treats as a transfer of operational authority, an object that confers the power to issue binding orders. The gods will not engage her. Anu is sent, approaches, and turns back. E is sent, approaches, and turns back. This is recorded plainly, twice, with no attempt to soften it. Only then does Marduk agree to take the field, and he does not agree for free. He demands supreme and permanent authority as his price, in writing before the campaign, and the assembly convenes and grants it. A negotiated command contract, ratified by a council, ahead of deployment. The engagement itself is described in operational detail. Marduk equips a storm chariot with 4 named horses. He deploys a net at the 4 winds, so that no part of her can escape through any quarter. He carries the flood weapon, and he brings the evil wind, and here is the maneuver the text is precise about. When Tiamat opens her mouth to swallow him, he drives the wind into her so that she cannot close it, and while she is held open he puts the arrow through her. Then he takes her apart. The text says he split her like a shellfish into 2 halves. One half he raised as the sky, and he set a crossbar and posted guards with explicit standing orders not to let her waters escape. The other half became the ground under your feet. He took the tablet of destinies off Kingu's chest and sealed it with his own seal. Then he executed Kingu, and from Kingu's blood he made humankind, and the tablets state the purpose without ornament, so that the gods might be freed from labor. The 5th tablet is the one nobody quotes. After the battle, Marduk sets the calendar. He stations the stars in their positions, fixes the year at 12 months, assigns 3 constellations to each month, and establishes the phases of the moon with the days on which each phase occurs. The Babylonian astronomical system, the system that gave us the 60-minute hour and the 360-degree circle, is presented in the text as post-war reconstruction, administrative work, done after the fighting stopped. And the Akitu festival is where the state kept it alive. 11 days every spring, funded, staffed, and scheduled. The Enuma Elish read in full on the 4th day. And on the 5th, the king of Babylon entered the shrine, was stripped of his crown, his ring, his scepter, and his mace, and the high priest struck him across the face and pulled his ears until he wept. The tears were required. A recorded tear was a favorable omen for the year, and no tears meant the year would go badly. The most powerful man in Mesopotamia was slapped in public, annually, as a term of his tenure because of the outcome of a war between gods. The standard reading is creation mythology, the sort of thing every culture produces. Creation mythology does not inventory 11 troop classes. It does not record 2 commanders declining the mission by name. It does not put the command authority into a transferable physical object with a seal on it. So what did Babylon read out loud every year for 1,000 years? Why does the account list the enemy order of battle like a muster roll? Why is the calendar we still use presented as post-war administration? And why did the king have to be struck in the face and produce tears before the state considered the year safe? The tablets are in the British Museum. Smith read them in 1876. The text has not changed since. Now cross the desert into QAnon, where an army kept a written inventory of what it found already living there. Number 5. The Israelites versus the Anakim. You're on the eastern edge of the Jordan Valley in 1406 BCE, watching 12 scouts come back from a 40-day reconnaissance into the highlands. 2 of them are carrying a single cluster of grapes slung on a pole between their shoulders, because one man cannot lift it. That detail is in the report, and it is the least remarkable thing they brought back. What the scouts describe is a population already holding the land. They give the cities, they give the defenses, and then they give the inhabitants. The Anakim, the sons of Anak, in whose presence the scouts state they appeared to themselves as grasshoppers, and appeared the same way to the Anakim looking back. 10 of the 12 recommend abandoning the campaign. An armed force that had just walked out of Egypt turned around because of what was standing in the hill country. Here's what the inventory says, and it is an inventory, not a poem. This record gives troop dispositions, city names that have since been excavated, and dimensions. Og, king of Bashan, is listed as the last survivor of the Rephaim. The text states his bed was made of iron and measured 9 cubits by 4 cubits, 13.5 feet long and 6 feet wide. Then it does something no legend does. It tells the reader where to go and look at it. The bed, the text says, is in Rabbah of the Ammonites, present tense, at the time of writing. That is a museum reference. It is an author telling an audience the object is on display in a neighboring kingdom and can be inspected. The record distinguishes 4 separate populations, each with its own territory. The Rephaim in Bashan, the Emimei in Moab, the Zamzumei in Ammon, the Anakim in the hill country around Hebron. 4 entries, 4 locations, filed the way the same document files ordinary nations. Then there's Gath. 3 centuries after the invasion, the record states the Anakim were destroyed everywhere except in 3 coastal cities and names them: Gaza, Ashdod, and Gath. Goliath of Gath is listed at 6 cubits in a span, 9 feet 9 inches. His coat of mail is given at 5,000 shekels of bronze, roughly 125 pounds. His spearhead alone is 600 shekels of iron, roughly 15 pounds. Modern infantry body armor weighs about 30 pounds and soldiers complain about it. Goliath was not unique, and this is the part that rarely gets read aloud. A later chapter lists 4 more of the same lineage at Gath, killed in separate engagements by named soldiers, with their heights and weapons recorded individually. One is described with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 digits. That is a specific, anatomically precise detail that nobody invents to make an enemy sound frightening. Now step outside the Israelite record entirely. At Ras Shamra on the Syrian coast, French excavators recovered the archive of Ugarit in 1929, written in a different language, by a different people, with a different religion, who had no reason to corroborate anything. The Ugaritic tablets contain their own Rephaim texts. Same word, same beings. Described as a distinct order, summoned by name, arriving by chariot. 2 hostile archives, independently preserved, naming the same order of beings. The architecture agrees too. Bashan, the territory the text assigns to Og, is the Golan, and it holds one of the densest megalithic fields on Earth. More than 5,000 basalt dolmens, some with capstones exceeding 50 tons. In the middle of it sits Rujam el-Hiri, 5 concentric stone rings, 520 feet across, roughly 42,000 tons of basalt, aligned to the solstice sunrise, built by no population anyone has been able to identify. Local Arabic tradition has called that structure the Wheel of the Giants for as long as anyone has recorded local names. What followed was not a conquest. The stated objective was elimination. The record is explicit that the campaign against these populations was total, that no settlement was to be left, and it then tracks the 3 cities where the effort failed. Nobody writes an extermination clause into a national history about a metaphor. The conventional reading is hyperbole, that ancient armies inflated their enemies to inflate their victories. Hyperbole does not give you a bed's dimensions in 2 axes. It does not name the city where the object is currently displayed. It does not count fingers. So who were the Anakim, and why did 4 separate territories each hold a named branch of them? Why does a hostile foreign archive at Ugarit describe the same beings under the same name? What population raised 42,000 tons of basalt in the Golan and left no trace of itself? And where is Og's bed now? Rabbah is modern Amman. The address in the text is a real place. Nobody has ever found what was in it. Now cross the Atlantic to a capital city that was built as a full-scale model of a battlefield where gods fought. Number 6. The Mexica and the Battle of Coatepec. You're in Mexico City on the 21st of February, 1978. Electrical workers are cutting a trench behind the cathedral 2 blocks off the main square, and their equipment has just stopped against something at a depth of about 6 feet. What they have hit is a carved stone disc, 10.8 feet across, weighing roughly 8 tons. When it is cleared, the carving shows a woman. She has been decapitated and dismembered, her head and limbs separated and arranged around the disc, bells on her cheeks. That stone was not lost. It was exactly where the Mexica put it, and it marks the position where a body landed at the end of a battle between divine beings. The Mexica recorded the engagement at Coatepec, the Serpent Mountain, and the fullest version comes from Fray Bernardino de Sahagun's Nahua informants. Recorded in Nahuatl in the Florentine Codex during decades of interviews completed around 1577. Coatepec, sweeping the temple on the mountain, conceives from a ball of feathers that falls against her. Her daughter Coatepec treats the pregnancy as a legitimacy crisis and moves to eliminate her, and she does not come alone. She brings the Senson Hiwitznahua, the 400 Southerners, the stars of the southern sky, and the account describes them arming, forming up, and advancing on the mountain in order of march. They are intercepted. Huitzilopochtli is born fully armed at the moment of the assault, comes out with the Siukotel, the fire serpent, already in hand, and uses it on his sister first. He takes her head off at the summit, and her body goes down the slope, breaking apart on the way. Then he turns on the 400, pursues them around the mountain, and destroys the formation. Here's what the Mexica did with that. They built the battlefield. The Templo Mayor at Tenochtitlan is not a temple that commemorates Coatepec. It is Coatepec, constructed at scale. The southern shrine at the summit is Huitzilopochtli's position. The stairway is the slope. And at the base of that stairway, at ground level, they set the Cuilcesto K-stone, so that the dismembered body lies precisely where the account says it came to rest. Sacrificial victims were brought to the summit and sent down the same stairs to land on the same stone. The state reenacted the killing, physically, in the middle of its capital, on a schedule. The 1978 stone triggered the Templo Mayor project under Eduardo Matos Moctezuma, which excavated the pyramid over the following decade and found 7 complete construction phases, each one built over the last, each one preserving the same geometry. Every rebuild kept the battlefield accurate. Spanish accounts put the final structure near 197 feet high. Now put that beside the 4th item in this video. In Babylon, a god kills the elder power, splits the body in two, and the world is assembled from the halves. In Mexico, a god kills the elder sibling, breaks the body apart on a mountainside, and the capital city is assembled on the spot where it landed. Both cultures then wrote the war into the state calendar and reperformed it annually at public expense. Babylon reading the tablets on the 4th of Nisan, the Mexica sending bodies down the stairs onto the stone. 2 civilizations, an ocean and 4,000 miles of open water apart, with no shared language and no contact of any kind. The same war, the same dismemberment, the same decision to build the state on top of the place where it happened. There is more of it in the ground. The sunstone, 24 tons of basalt, 12 feet across, was found under the main square in 1790. Its face records 4 previous suns, 4 previous world ages, and each one ends in a divine conflict. Destroyed by jaguars, by wind, by fire, by water. The Mexica were not recording one war. They were keeping a running list, and they placed themselves inside the 5th entry. So what did the Mexica lay out in stone under their own capital? Why does a battle account come with a construction specification precise enough to rebuild 7 times without drift? Why does the same divine war, with the same dismemberment and the same aftermath, appear on both sides of an ocean nobody had crossed? And what were they expecting at the end of the 5th sun? The Coatepec stone is still in Mexico City, indoors now, 100 yards from where the trench opened. It is lying exactly as it fell. From Mexico we sail to the Greek mainland, where the same war was carved into 371 feet of marble. Number 7. The Mycenaean Greeks versus the Gigantes. You're at the Lion Gate at Mycenae in 1250 BCE. The lintel over your head is a single limestone block weighing 20 tons, set 10 feet up, with 2 carved lionesses standing above it. Walk 200 yards along the circuit wall and the blocks get worse. 40 tons. 90. At Turin's, 10 miles south, the gallery walls run 25 feet thick and the largest stones exceed 130 tons, laid without mortar, with joints you cannot get a knife blade into. The Greeks living beside these walls in the classical period had a name for the people who built them, and it was not the name of any Greek. They called the technique Cyclopean, and they did not mean it as a compliment to human labor. They meant it literally. Pausanias, traveling the mainland in the 2nd century CE and writing the most reliable topographical survey to survive from antiquity, states flatly that the wall at Turin's was made by the Cyclopes and adds an engineering observation, that a pair of oxen could not so much as begin to move the smallest of the stones. Pausanias counted statues, copied inscriptions, and corrected local guides when they got their history wrong. He was not credulous. He looked at the wall, did the arithmetic on the haulage, and reported what the arithmetic told him. Here's what makes structural engineers uncomfortable. There is no ramp system at Turin's, no roller trackways, no counterweight pits, no crane socket cuttings, and no trace of the earthen embankments a 130-ton lift would leave in the stratigraphy for 3,000 years. The Egyptians left their ramps. The Romans left their crane fittings and wrote their manuals. At Turin's and Mycenae there is nothing except the finished wall. Then the technique vanishes. When Mycenaean civilization collapses around 1200 BCE, inside the same 50-year window that ends the Hittite Empire, nobody in Greece builds like this again. Not in the Archaic period, not in the Classical, not under Alexander, not under Rome. The most sophisticated masons of the ancient Mediterranean walked past those walls for 1,000 years and never reproduced them. Now here's what the Greeks said happened. The Gigantomachy is not a minor myth. It is the central war of the Greek record, fought at Phlegra against the Gigantes. And Hesiod gives the lineage and the terms in the Theogony, around 700 BCE. The condition attached to it is the detail that matters. The Gigantes could not be killed by gods alone. The prophecy required a mortal fighting alongside them. This is a war the record explicitly describes as joint. A human army in the field with divine allies against a divine enemy, because neither side could finish it without the other. The Pergamon altar, built in the 2nd century BCE, carries 371 feet of continuous carved frieze depicting that battle. The largest sculptural narrative surviving from the ancient world was commissioned by a Hellenistic state to record a war against giants. Nobody spends that money on a fable. Phlegra was identified in antiquity with the Phlegrean fields west of Naples, an active volcanic caldera 8 miles across that still vents sulfur, still lifts and drops the ground by feet at a time, and still empties towns. Greek and Roman authors reported enormous bones recovered from that ground, and they collected them. Herodotus records, in Book 1, that Sparta was told by the oracle to recover the bones of Orestes from Tegea, that a smith digging a well found a coffin 7 cubits long, 10.5 feet, containing a body of matching length, and that the Spartan state organized the removal and reburial as official policy. That is Herodotus reporting a government operation, with the finder's occupation, the location, and the measurement. Suetonius records that Augustus kept a collection at his villa on Capri of what he called the bones of giants and the weapons of heroes, displayed as a museum. The first emperor of Rome maintained a state collection of the enemy's remains. The disposal of the defeated has a measurement too. Hesiod describes Tartarus, the pit the Titans were confined in, and gives the depth as the distance a bronze anvil falls in 9 days. A physical quantity, in fall time, for a location. The conventional reading is corbelling, ramps, and lost technique. No technique that raises 130 tons disappears completely, in a literate region, forever. So who laid stones a yoke of oxen could not move? Why did the practice die in 1200 BCE and never return to the most inventive building culture in history? Why did Sparta send agents to recover a 10-foot skeleton on state authority? And why did Augustus keep the bones where guests could see them? The walls of Turin's are still standing. They are the oldest thing in Greece, and the only thing there nobody has ever explained. East across the Zagros, an empire recorded a war it fought inside a cave. Number 8. The Persians versus the Divs of Mazandaran. You're in the Alborz Mountains of northern Iran, in the forests above the Caspian, and the road you're following ends at a cave mouth. Cold air is coming out of the ground fast enough to move the grass at your feet. Behind you, below the fog line, is what remains of a Persian imperial army that can no longer see. Ahead of you, inside, is the commander who did that to them. This is the 5th of the 7 trials of Rostam, recorded in the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, completed by Firdusi in 1010 CE after 33 years of work. That is not a folklore collection. Firdusi compiled it from Sasanian state archives, the Kh-Watanamag royal chronicles, and surviving Middle Persian administrative material. It runs to roughly 60,000 couplets, the longest epic ever written by a single author, and it is the national historical record of Iran. Here's what that record says about the enemy. The Divs are not spirits, and the text never treats them as such. They have a kingdom, Mazandaran, a real province with real coordinates on the Caspian coast. They have a capital, a standing army, a command hierarchy, and maimed generals. Arjang, Bid, Sanjay, Pulad. They negotiate. They hold territory. They appear with the same administrative solidity as any human power Persia fought, and Persia fought everyone. Devi Sepid, the white Dev, is described specifically. Skin dark as pitch, hair white as snow across the whole body. Height beyond any man in the Persian army. Iron plate over the torso. And a capability the text files as a battlefield event rather than a wonder. He raises darkness and hail over an entire army at will. That is what happened to Caecavus. The Persian king took his force into Mazandaran on campaign. The white div came down on the encampment in a storm of black cloud and stones, and when it lifted, the entire army, the king, his commanders, the rank and file, was blind. Not routed, not scattered. Blinded, as a unit, in one engagement, then taken and held in the mountains. The text does not call it a punishment. It does not moralize it. It files the outcome the way any chronicle files a defeat and moves on to the relief operation. Rostam's campaign to recover them is described as a 7-stage penetration of hostile terrain, ending inside the cave. He kills Arjang first, then the white div in single combat, and the cure for the blindness is stated with clinical flatness. The liver of the white div, applied to the eyes of the afflicted. 3 drops. The army's sight returns. The text gives the dosage. Nothing in that passage is written as a miracle. It is written as a field treatment with a specified biological source. Now step out of the epic and into the archaeology, because Persian kings carved this war into stone. At Persepolis, on the palace stairways and door jambs, the royal iconography repeatedly shows the king driving a spear or short sword into an upright figure that is not a man. Horned, clawed, standing on hind legs, engaging the king face to face as an equal combatant. That image is the official state portrait of Achaemenid kingship, repeated across the complex. And in 1935, excavators at Persepolis recovered an inscription of Xerxes I, catalogued as XPH and known as the Deva inscription. In it, the king of the largest empire on earth states, in his own words, that among the lands he ruled, there was a place where the Devas had been worshipped, that he went there, that he destroyed the sanctuary, and that he issued a proclamation that the Devas shall not be worshipped. That is not myth. That is a head of state recording a military and legislative action against a named divine order, carved in 3 languages, on a wall, for permanent public record. The older Avestan material behind it makes the same distinction. Zoroaster's entire reform is defined as anti-Deva. The Vendidad is literally the law against the Devas, and it treats them as a rival order that had to be driven out of the territory, not as abstractions of vice. The cave is still there. People in Mazandaran will still point you to the Devi Sepid cave, and the name has never changed. So what took the sight of an entire Persian army in a single engagement? Why does the Shahnameh give the Divs generals a capital and negotiating positions? Why is the King of Kings shown spearing something with horns on his own palace stairs? And what exactly did Xerxes go and demolish? The Deva inscription is in Tehran. It is 1,100 words long. Nobody disputes the translation. In the Anatolian highlands, an empire fought a serpent and then reenacted the fight every spring for 400 years. Number 9. The Hittites versus the Illuyanka. You're in Hattusa in 1400 BCE, in a stone chamber on the Acropolis above the city, and the room smells of cedar shelving and clay dust. Around you are 30,000 tablets, stacked by subject, catalogued with colophons that give the title, the scribe, and the tablet number in the series. The oldest organized state archive ever recovered. Treaties on one shelf, grain accounts on another, land grants, court rulings, medical texts, and filed among the festival documents, with a catalog number and a budget attached, is the account of a war against a serpent. The archive was found by Hugo Winkler at Bogaskoy in central Turkey in 1906. Nobody could read it until Bedrich Rosny cracked the language in 1915 and showed that Hittite was Indo-European. What came out of the translation was an empire nobody had known existed. A Bronze Age superpower that fought Egypt to a standstill at Kadesh in 1274 BCE and signed the first surviving peace treaty in history, a copy of which hangs at the United Nations. Here's what the state actually filed. The Illuyanka texts, catalogued as CTH 321, exist in 2 separate versions, and the archive preserved both, rather than reconciling them, which is what a records office does with conflicting official reports. In the first, the storm god meets the Illuyanka in open battle at Kiskalusa and loses. Not narrowly. He is defeated outright and driven from the field. He then goes to another deity for help, and the plan they build is logistical rather than heroic. A feast is prepared with enormous stored quantities of drink. The serpent is drawn out of its lair with its offspring. And once it has consumed everything, it cannot physically get back down into the hole. A human named Hupasia ties it with rope while it is stuck. Then it is killed. Note who tied it. A man. The account requires a human operator, and Hupasia sets his own terms before agreeing to participate. In the second version, the storm god loses his heart and his eyes to the Illuyanka in the first engagement. The recovery runs through a marriage. He fathers a son, marries him into the serpent's household, and instructs him to ask for the missing organs as a bride price. He does. They are returned and restored. The son, now bound by obligation to the other side, is killed alongside the serpent at his own father's hand when the trap closes, and the archive kept that ending too. Here is why this outranks folklore. The Puruli festival was an annual state ceremony of the Hittite Empire, held every spring, commemorating the outcome of that war. It appears in the calendar. It appears in the provisioning records. It had assigned personnel, allocated livestock, a fixed processional route, and royal attendance requirements, and it ran for centuries. A government does not budget 400 years of state ritual around a story it made up. It maintained an annual observance for a military event. Walk 2/3 of a mile northeast of the city walls, and you reach Yazilakaya, a natural rock gorge the Hittites converted into a sanctuary. More than 90 figures are carved into the limestone in procession, each labeled with its name in hieroglyphic Luwian. They are not human forms. Horned headdresses, non-human proportions, the 12 running gods advancing in identical stride down one wall. An outdoor gallery of the parties involved, name-tagged, cut into living rock, and the treaties settle it. Hittite state treaties, with Egypt, with Amurru, with Mitanni, are legal instruments with clauses, witnesses, and penalties. In every one, these beings are invoked by name as guarantors and enforcers of the agreement. Sealed diplomatic documents, exchanged with foreign powers, naming divine parties as the enforcement mechanism. You do not write a fiction into a binding treaty with Ramesses II. Then Hattusa burned. Around 1180 BCE, the capital was destroyed, the empire ended inside a generation, and the archive stopped mid-sequence. Now count how many times you have seen this. At Edfu, the priesthood performed the War of Horus and Set annually in the temple forecourt, with a script and a cast. In Babylon, the Enuma Elish was read aloud in full every 4th of Nisan, and the king was struck in the face for it. In Mexico, bodies went down the Templo Mayor stairs onto the stone where Coatepec landed. And here, the Puruli ran every spring for 4 centuries. 4 states, 3 continents, no shared language, each spending public money to restage a war between gods on a fixed annual date. So what did the Hittite state hold an annual festival about? Why does the account insist a human had to tie the thing down? Who are the 90 labeled figures at Yazilakaya? And why does a peace treaty with Egypt name them as the enforcers? The tablets are in Ankara and Istanbul, complete, catalogued, translated. Nobody has ever proposed what the empire was celebrating. The last one is the only case where both armies were divine, and one of them never left. Number 10. The Tuatha De Danann versus the Fomorians. You're on the plain of Moytura in County Sligo, in the northwest of Ireland, and the cloud is sitting about 60 feet off the ground. Wet grass. Cairns on the ridgeline in every direction. The stone monuments around you at Carramore number over 30, and the earliest date to 3700 BCE. Older than Newgrange, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids at Giza by 6 centuries. The battle fought on this ground is dated in the Irish record to roughly 1897 BCE, and it was fought between 2 armies, neither of which was mortal. Ireland did not file this as legend. The Leber Gabala Éireann, the Book of Invasions, and the Annals of the Four Masters, compiled at Donegal between 1632 and 1636 from far older monastic material, are the national chronology. They list these events with regnal years, in sequence, in the same columns as the ordinary kings of Munster and Leinster. Here's what the annals actually record. The Tuatha De Danann arrived in a dark cloud that covered the sun for 3 days, landing in the western mountains, and they burned their own ships on the shore, so that nobody could leave. They brought 4 objects with them from 4 northern cities. A stone that cried out under the rightful king, a spear that made its holder unbeatable, a sword nobody escaped once it was drawn, and a cauldron that never emptied. The Fomorians were already there, and they came from the sea. The texts describe them with one eye, one arm, and one leg, and in the older material, animal heads on human bodies. They held Ireland under tribute, 2/3 of the corn, 2/3 of the milk, and 2/3 of the children born each year, collected annually at Samahan. Valor is the reason this section exists. The Fomorian commander is described with a second eye that was kept closed, because everything in its line of sight was destroyed when it opened. The lid was too heavy for him to lift himself. 4 men and a polished hooked pole were required to raise it, and the texts state it was opened only on the battlefield, deliberately, at a chosen moment, and that an entire army fell in front of it. At the Second Battle of Moytura, Lug put a sling stone through that eye from the flank. The eye came out the back of Balor's skull, and the beam went through his own ranks behind him. Then there's Nuada. The king of the Tuatha de Danann lost his arm at the First Battle of Moytura, and Dian Sect, the physician, fitted him with a working replacement of silver. Articulated, with movement at every joint, described as functioning in combat. He wore it for 7 years. Then Dian Sect's son Miash replaced it with an arm of flesh, grown onto the stump over 9 days and nights. An articulated metal prosthetic, and then a limb regeneration, in sequence, with the physicians named. And the Well of Slain. The annals record that the Tuatha de Danann's physicians kept a well behind their lines into which the dead of each day were placed, and that they came out of it the next morning alive and able to fight. The Fomorians identified this as the decisive asset in the war, and their answer was not an attack on the line. It was an operation to fill the well with stones. The Chronicle treats that as the turning point of the campaign. 2 armies, and the strategic objective was a medical facility. The piece that ended it carries the strangest term in the entire Irish record. The captured Fomorian Brez was spared execution on one condition: that he give up the agricultural calendar. When to plow, when to sow, when to reap. Irish farming knowledge in the National Chronicle is a surrender term extracted from the enemy, and the Tuatha de Danann never left the island. When they were finally displaced by the incoming Milesians, the settlement divided Ireland in 2. The surface to the newcomers, everything below it to them. And they went into the Shia mounds. Those mounds stayed untouchable. Irish farmers have refused to plow them for 4,000 years, and in 1999, the National Road Authority rerouted a section of motorway in County Clare around a hawthorn associated with them. 10 civilizations, 4 continents, no shared language, no shared writing, and in most cases no possible contact. And every one of them kept the same kind of document. A war fought by divine beings, recorded with dates, place names, and the disposition of the bodies. Everyone filed it in its own official archive, in its own hand, alongside the tax rolls and the king lists. We are the first civilization in 4,000 years to move it to a different shelf and call it mythology. If you made it this far, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Like the video if you think the official version leaves too much out. And drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from.